All right, everybody, welcome to the matchup chess fans have been waiting for, Magnus Carlsen versus Yağız Kaan Erdoğmuş. On one side, Magnus, arguably the greatest player to ever touch a chessboard. On the other side, Yağız Kaan, the teenage prodigy, who is basically collecting world records like Pokemon cards. The youngest 2,700 rated player in history, completely absurd, and today, he has a chance to do something even crazier. Become the youngest player ever to defeat Magnus Carlsen in a classical game. No pressure at all.
Magnus with white opens with pawn to d4. We have pawn to d5 by Yağız Kaan, knight of 3. We have pawn to c5, going for the Chaos variation, and Magnus tries with c4. And now you could transpose into some sort of a standard pseudo-Tarrasch with pawn to e6, but Yağız Kaan not afraid of a challenge. He plays d captures on c4. Pawn to e4 by Magnus, and now c captures on d4. We have queen captures, and the queens immediately lead the board. Captures, captures, and bishop to d7. This is the so-called Rubinstein defense. And if you've ever seen the Rubinstein play, you know that he would very much welcome an endgame right from the start. So bishop captures on d4, and now knight to c6. And one thing that's odd about this game, unlike other games, is that now Yağız Kaan seems to be playing pretty much instantly. He's not burning 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes per move, as he does with everyone else. No, now he plays Magnus Carlsen, and now he plays instantly. But okay, so theory, knight captures and pawn to f3 that's the most popular line. Magnus switches it up a little bit. He plays bishop to e3, and now Yağız Kaan plays knight captures on b4. We have bishop captures and pawn to e6, followed by pawn to f3. There are some games where knight to c3 was played, but the f3 is a new move, so it is now as of move 10. There we have a completely new game. Yağız Kaan brings the knight into the king, knight e7. King to f2, no need to castle, it's the endgame, so the king will be useful in the center of the board. Knight e6 attacks the bishop, and bishop to e3. You could also maybe consider c3, but then you allow this diagonal to the black bishop. So there should be e3. We have rook at a c8, and now knight to d2. We had knight d5, attacking the bishop, and the Magnus pops it back in. Bishop d2. We have bishop to c5, and now we have a trade. Captures, captures, and rook h to c1, which Yağız Kaan happily gobbles up. We have captures, captures, and knight to c6. So now both of them have burned some time. Yağız Kaan now bound to 40 minutes, Magnus on an hour, and that Magnus finds this beautiful pawn to e5 move, which seems like a blunder, but if Yağız Kaan captures, then Magnus gets his rook to c7, and you're going to lose that b7 pawn. And you're not just losing a pawn, you're also allowing this rook to be promoted to a pig. So king to e7, and now pawn to f4. Magnus grabs more space, and he defends that e5 pawn. Rook to c8, and now pawn to a3, followed by pawn to f6. Yağız Kaan now wants to break Magnus' strong center. E captures with check. We had g captures, and now rook to c3. Knight to b4, offering the rook trade, and Magnus agrees to that as well. We have rook captures, and bishop to d3, puts pressure on that h7 pawn. And Yağız Kaan just plays pawn to h6. And it's bishop versus knight against bishop versus knight. Sorry, it's bishop and knight versus bishop and knight. The bishops are even of the same color. The only thing that is noticeable and even it's two pawns on the queen side, 4 on the king side, but 3 on the king side. But one thing that's noticeable is that Yağız Kaan has 3 pawn islands and Magnus has 2. Now, this is a very, very small difference, but you know from experience that it's always better to have 2 pawn islands than 3. But still, a very, very equalish position. We have king to e3. Knight back to c6, and now knight to f3. We have pawn to b6 and pawn to g4. Now, Yağız Kaan tries to take advantage of this g4 pawn push immediately, as it's undefended, so he plays pawn to e5, and Magnus defends it. Pawn to h3. We have king to d6, and the knight to d2. Now trying to remaneuver with the knight to grab more space. E captures with check, king captures, and now knight to d5 attacks the bishop, and bishop to f5. Magnus would love to trade on f5 so he can get his king in, and if he gets his king into the game like this, then he's very likely winning the game. So bishop to b7, of course, Yağız Kaan will not allow that, and the bishop back to c2. Magnus now opting to get the king to the f5 square, We have bishop to g2, attacking h3 pawn, and king to g3, forcing Magnus to go back, and bishop to d5. We have king back therefore, and Yağız Kaan repeats bishop to g2. But now Magnus does not repeat. He goes pawn to h4. And again, Magnus is playing a little bit quicker here. He has 10 extra minutes. Yağız Kaan now down to 4.5 minutes, and still needs to make 5 more moves to reach time control. We have king to e7, pawn to b3, and now bishop to h3, putting pressure on the pawn here. Bishop to f5 defending, and bishop to g2. So these are a couple of easy moves to get closer to move 40. Knight to e4, and here Yağız Kaan could go for something like knight to d3 chart, force the king back, and then, you know, move around a little bit. But a minute and a half on the clock, he decides to trade. He plays bishop captures on e4, and now knight could capture with the king, and then something like king to d6. It's very, very hard to actually make progress here. So instead, Magnus captures with the bishop, now wants to get the king to f5 right away, and the Yağız Kaan plays knight to f7. And this is the only way to play it. I'll give you an example. If you play king to e6, you're already lost. It seems like, yes, it's a great move, but look at this. Bishop f5 checked, king to e7, and now you play h5, or because it doesn't really matter what black plays. Let's say king to d6. Now you will bishop to c8, and you cannot stop king f5. Even if king c7, you can go bishop to e6, and still king to f5 is coming, and that's going to lose you the f6 pawn, or you move the knight to defend it, but then the king goes over to the h pawn. So that's the way to do it. But Yağız Kaan plays knight f7, and now look at this, bishop to b5. You cannot trade. If you trade, then Magnus is winning, and now knight to b6. And look at now this beautiful setup that Yağız Kaan made. Look at the pawns covering the dark squares and the knight covering the b5 and f5. So the Magnus's king doesn't really have a way of entering the game. You can use the b5 square and the h5 square, but you're not really getting to the h5 square with your king. And it's going to be very hard to get to the d5 square, because if this bishop ever moves, the king will come to e6. So not a lot of good ways for Magnus to break through. But okay, he has to try. Pawn to a4, we have king to b7, and pawn to b4. We have knight to c8, and king to e4, and knight b7, king to b4, and now pawn to f5 by Yağız Kaan. King to d6, also you can just play like this, but he played pawn to f5. Now Magnus goes g5, we have captures, and king to d6. And this is now, again, a very equal position, but bishop to b7, there's no objectively, there's no objective way you can win this, but you can present problems for your opponent, and then with solid come on the clock, maybe he messes it up. We have knight g6, king to c4, now trying to go over for that a7 pawn, and knight to f8. We have bishop to c8, and now knight to e6, going after the g5 pawn, and now Magnus plays pawn to g6. And here, believe it or not, you can still easily guard this game. You can play pawn to f4, or even knight g7. This is still fine. You guard the d5 pawning, you stop the g pawn from moving, and if king at b5, now you can even go king c7. Which tempo, and once the pressure moves, you can go knight e6, and everything is fine. But after g6, Yağız Kaan played king to e7. It's the one mistake he made in the game, and one more than enough for Magnus Carlsen to take advantage of. He plays king to b5. And I couldn't ask you to, maybe make this deposit any moment, but I know you guys would play king to b5 here, as you guys are amazing players. So I decided to make the next move deposit any moment. Now Yağız Kaan plays pawn to f4. It seems that his pawn is now unstoppable, but that there is a way to stop it. Feel free to pause the video and win the game for Magnus while I give you a couple of seconds. If you were able to check out, to solve this one, congratulations, you are a true master of the endgame. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it is not bishop to b7. It's actually king to a6, which sounds weird, but it is. Point is that after bishop to b7, you can go for knight e7 check, and now you force the king away from a6. You can play king to c6, but now knight e6, and now it's bishop at a6, you have this disgustingly beautiful b5. And now you cut off the bishop if you capture with the pawn, or if you capture with the bishop, then knight to d4 check. just checking the king and the bishop, or you can do pretty much anything. You capture the bishop, and then the pawn will just promote. It's still going to be a draw, but that's how you save it. But after king to a6, there is no defense. Now Yağız Kaan takes pawn to f3, Magnus captures an a7, and now we have pawn to b5. Now pawn to f2 doesn't really do anything because bishop a6, and you have no problems here. So Yağız Kaan plays pawn to b5, hoping for a counter on b5, and then bishop a6 no longer works. But now Magnus finds this beautiful pawn to g7 move. And we can show, this is actually a really fun line. Pawn to f2, g7. And now if f1 queen, you will play g8 queen. So both players were with queen, and now after queen to a1 check, it seems like you might have something here, but after king b7, you actually don't. Knight to d8 with checking to b8, you can go queen d5, checking to a, and that's it. You can just repeat, or you can capture on b5, and then white starts checking, and it's going to be a draw. But after g7, now it's again completely winning because the king cannot go to f8, and if you go to f7, then bishop captures with check, and then you promote to a queen. So after g7, Yağız Kaan had to capture it. He was so sad when he saw this. It was so extremely sad and disturbed. He played knight captures on g7, and now Magnus just plays a captures on b5, because now f2 can be met with bishop to h3 once the knight moved from e6. So he does play it. There is no other way to do it. If you block with knight to e6, interestingly, b6 is the winning idea, because now, of course, after f2, you again have access to the a6 square. So incredible stuff. Yağız Kaan played pawn to f2, and now Magnus just played bishop to h3. And check out that position. Look at how broken Yağız Kaan is. He had a draw versus Magnus. He could have finished the tournament undefeated, but one mistake against Magnus, and there will be no draws. So bishop to h3, Yağız Kaan goes knight to d6, and now just pawn to b6. Magnus precise to the very end with knight to b4, b7, and now knight to c6 check. Knight must play king to e8, and he was in this position on move 59 that Yağız Kaan Erdoğmuş resigned the game.
If you enjoyed this breakdown, hit like and subscribe for more insane chess games and analysis. Let me know in the comments who you want to see featured next, and whether you think the next generation is actually ready to challenge Magnus Carlsen. See you in the next one.